So, Emmanuel Macron has had a meeting with the Chinese president, of which he thinks that they should work a little closer together, cuddles and all. This, remember, was the bloke who was angry because we decided to no longer build the submarines that France was making because we wanted to be able to sidle up closer to the Americans and the US. And in actual fact, American nuclear subs are currently in Perth as we speak. Now, I remember weeks and weeks and weeks of conversation about how annoyed the French were. Seems like the former government and the current government made exactly the right decision, James, which was to get away from the French.
And I remember doing some of the reporting around that back at the time that all of that broke. But, you know, I don't think anybody who knows a scintilla of history here, Paul, should be one bit surprised by this behavior by Macron because, you know, this sort of French diplomatic perfidy goes back literally for centuries. People we'll remember the 1980s when Reagan couldn't fly bombers over France to bomb Gaddafi. They'll remember what a hard time de Gaulle had dealing with Churchill, and Churchill had dealing with de Gaulle, how France didn't want to be in NATO. All of this. This goes back to Louis XIV, when the French signed a memorandum of not doing anything to stop the Ottomans from invading Vienna because, according to Louis XIV, when the Holy Roman Empire said, hey, we need your help, no, crusading's not fashionable anymore. So this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. This goes back hundreds of years, and we should always make our diplomatic plans accordingly, Paul.
Well, interestingly, one of the quotes here, and I think we can whack these up from Macron, says, the question Europeans need to answer, is it in our interest to accelerate on Taiwan? No. The worst thing that would be think the Europeans must become followers on this subject and take a cue from the US agenda and Chinese overreaction. Europeans cannot resolve the crisis in Ukraine. How can we credibly say in Taiwan, watch out, if you do something wrong, then we will be there? Now, what is he quite admitting about the failures, about what's happening right now in the Ukraine? But, Matt, this is an interesting little attempt here, and I noticed that the Herald, in one of its editorials, is saying this bloke kind of, well, is the ultimate shapeshifter, and while his own capital city is burning because he wants people to retire 2 years later, he sort of shapeshifts into sort of part position that Xi wants, which is basically China is for Taiwan is for China to worry about, not Europe, US, and places like Australia.
Yeah, well, James is right there. He's trumped me with the history. I was going to go with that, although not all the way back to Louis XIV. But I do in all the reporting here. I am perplexed that there doesn't seem to be any comments from Emmanuel Macron about China's position on Ukraine, and in particular China's continuing support and seemingly friendship with the Russian government, with Vladimir Putin in particular. I mean, maybe Macron is not that worried about Taiwan, although I think the international implications of anything that happens there will affect France too. But he should be, of course, very worried about what's happening in his own backyard in Europe. And one of the reasons that continues to happen is because the likes of Vladimir Putin has seemingly the unending, unconditional support of the Chinese president. And so it's very disappointing to see Macron, who apparently was so strident towards the Australian government and our perfidy to rip up a nuclear submarine contract, but can't seem to have the same strength of approach to a government that is actually supporting the invasion of another European country.